All right. Hello, everyone. It's January 25th, 2025. Welcome to Synergetics Stream 22.1. Hello to Stroopy already. The spirit for today, focus, patience, vision. Synergetics is participatory. Please leave a comment, reach out, get involved, etc. Today, we will briefly touch on the key memes and themes, pick up on some things to integrate, and then head into the sections. There will be a brief look at the Math for Wisdom document, then a extended single reading or focal section, 537 from Synergetics, 12 Universal Degrees of Freedom, and then probably return to the Math for Wisdom coda and look a little bit towards 2025. So we briefly review some of our favorite key themes of Synergetics. Synergetics exists for us in namespaces and language games, forms of life. It's relational, multi-scale systems thinking, connected to accessible experiences, without infinitesimals or points, lines, planes, simply as such. It frames design as anticipatory cybernetic science. We explore the mapping of tensegrity to synergetics akin to engineering and physics. Universe is the total scenario, and we think 4D and yes and. And I took from the topics to include the 537, which had been lingering around for some time, and decided to do the first stream of the year on 537 and reread it several times. A lot of interesting topics and a lot of other things to follow up on from here. So let's actually go to 537 first and then jump over to the document and review what we've been working on over in Math for Wisdom and look towards 2025 and see who else has joined by then and see which comments have come into the chat. So let us go to 537. Okay, 537 is called 12 Universal Degrees of Freedom. It's an interesting section that's going to take us on a few different journeys, and it's going to deal a lot with 12-ness. 1. Nothing stands in a vacuum of universe. Nothing can change locally without changing everything else. We have to look for conditions where there is permitted transformability and where there is some really great unanimity of degrees of freedom. We see that certain kinds of patterns accrue from certain numbers of restraints. You could see how planar things could happen as a consequence of 2 restraints, and how linear things could happen as a consequence of 3 restraints. See section 401, 12 vectors of restraint define minimum system. We see then that we are in a universe where there is a certain limited number of permitted freedoms. Synergetics discovers that whatever is rigidly related to anything else discloses 12 restraints. There are a minimum of 12 restraints in developing anything we might call a rigidly related set of events. And the figure from 401 is this one. It's a sphere totally immobilized within a tet where each of the tensegrity vertices are of the spinning wheel type, and it isn't until the 12th string with tensile force is affixed that this ball ceases movement. This, I think, with connecting constraint or restraint to dimensionality like a manifold, it's an interesting alternative take on, for example, Kandinsky's point and line to plane, in that in the abstract geometry, people might say things like, well, 2 points make a line and 3 make a plane. And here we have linearity arises as a consequence of 3 restraints, that's the plane, and planarity, linearity arising as a consequence of 3 restraints being when 3 possible degrees of freedom have been removed, whereas planarity on a flat surface happens as a consequence of 2 restraints. And section 401 has that being incrementally constructed. 2. We start with universe as a closed system of complementary patterns, i.e. regenerative, i.e. adequate to itself, that has at any one moment for any one of its subpatterns 12 degrees of freedom. There is an enormous complexity of choice. We start playing the game, the most complicated game of chess that has ever been played. We start to play the game universe, which requires absolute integrity. You start with 12 alternate directions and multi-billions of frequency options for your first move. And from that move, you have again the same multi-options at each of your successive moves. The number of moves that can be made is unlimited, but the moves must always be made in absolute respect for all the other moves and developments of evoluting universe. Always so many ways to take each thing, so many things to say on each. Interesting movement from you and we are playing, and that this riddle, yet tautology, yet consequence of universe as closed and whole unto itself, hence not needing the, and also this sort of Wolfram-like multi-way compute choice concept, which is going to come back later. 3. The game of universe is like chess, with 92 unique men, each of which has 4 different frequencies available, and it works on 12 degrees of freedom instead of a planar checkerboard. The vector equilibrium becomes the omnidirectional checker frame, and you can change the frequencies to suit conditions. But you must observe and obey the complexity of mass attraction and the critical proximity between precessing and falling in. And there are also electromagnetic attractions and repulsions built into the game. Interesting, continuing with the chess metaphor. 92 referring to the sub-uranium elements on the periodic table. 4 different frequencies available, not sure what that would refer to. Carbon might make 4 single bonds, but not all elements make 4 bonds. And an interesting connection there with the isotropic vector matrix being like this omnidirectional checker frame. In order to be able to think both finitely and comprehensively in terms of total systems, we have to start off with universe itself. We must include all the universal degrees of freedom. Though containing the frequently irrational and uneconomic XYZ dimensional relationships, the universe does not employ the 3-dimensional frame of reference in its ever most economical, omni-rational coordinate system transactions. Nature does not use rectilinear coordination in its continual intertransforming. Nature coordinates in 12 alternately equi-economical degrees of freedom, 6 positive and 6 negative. For this reason, 12 is the minimum number of spokes you must have in a wire wheel in order to make a comprehensive structural integrity of that tool. You must have 6 positive and 6 negative spokes to offset all polar or equatorial diaphragming and torque. See illustration 640.40. I'm going to load that up in another tab. Here we have a connection between the 12-ness of stability reflected in the all-balanced way by the vector equilibrium, or in this more drawn-out way by sort of a bike wheel with spokes, and a combination of the 12ness of stability with the arising of XYZ-like coordination possibilities within the actual geometry of nature, the isotropic vector matrix. Here in 640.40, here we see stabilization of tension, minimum of 12 spokes. So here's a constructivist approach to showing how stabilization happens once there are 12 units of tension. It takes a minimum of 12 spokes to overcome the turbining element with the minimum 4 vectors of restraint. So those are the 4 quadre vectors of movement with the 12 attachment points needed to stabilize all of their combinations. This is demonstrated with the 12-spoke wire wheel with its 6 positive diaphragm and 6 negative diaphragm, of which respectively 3 each are positively and negatively opposed turbining or torque members. 2-axis and 3-axis universal joints, analogous to the wire wheel as a basic system relying on the differentiation of tension and compression for its effectiveness. These all may be considered basic tensegrity systems. Four, 6, 12. Once a closed system is recognized as exclusively valid, the list of variables and the degrees of freedom are closed and limited to 6 positive and 6 negative alternatives of action for each local transformation event in universe. 4 sets of actions, reactions, and resultants. Nature always employs only the most economical, intertransformative, and omnicosmic interrelatedness behavioral stratagems. With each and every event in universe, no matter how frequently recurrent, there are always 12 unique, equi-economical, omnidirectionally operative, alternative action options, which 12 occur as 4 sets of 3, always interdependent and concurrent actions, reactions, and resultants. This is to say that with each high frequency of recurring turns to play of each and all systems, there are 6 moves that can be made in 12 optional directions. Let's load up some of these reference images. Core concepts, the economy of nature, very similar to Bayes optimality. It's like Bayes optimality doesn't mean that every organism is adaptive. So just because nature employs the most economic maneuvers doesn't mean engines convert all of gasoline's potential chemical energy into work. It means that at the macro or the high frequency scale, the mesoscale that we're at, whether the engine converts 90 or 10 or 1% of the theoretical maximum energy of the fuel into productive work rather than heat, that itself is an emergent outcome of the most economical properties occurring at a more granular level. Let's just look at these images, see where they go. The coming sections are going to return to this basic event concept. And here, the 12 is split as 4 sets of 3. So there's the 12 being split into 2 sets of 6, 2 half dozens. There's the 12 as 4 sets of 3. I wonder if there's a 3 sets of 4. Okay. So this is 421. I think here's the... Well, this is close. Cool image. I think it's too large of a file. 251.46. Some of the links don't work so well. 521.06. Maybe I won't go to these images. Universe divisible by 2. Everything in universe is divisible by 2. There will always be 2 poles to any system. Unity is 2. Core memes. Starting with everything and disregarding irrelevancies. Unity is plural, at minimum 2. 2-ness, 3-ness, and 4-ness. 9. All the aspects of the constant relative abundances of points, areas, and lines are divisible by 2. 4 faces, 4 points, and 6 edge lines of the tet, or 4 eyes. Thus, there are 6 vectorial moves for every event. Each of the vectorial moves is reversible, hence 12. Positional differentials in universe derive only from the 6-ness of the 12 degrees of freedom. Again, a lot to think about. With tet as minimum space enclosure, there are ratiometric, discrete topological connections a la Euler's formula among points, planes, and lines. These are always even, which is to say divisible by 2. And I think it's going to, here with this 12-ness, return again and again. What are these 6 vectorial moves? These are the 6 ways that that sphere being stabilized, the 6 ways it can move. There's the 4 quadray ways it can move, and summations of quadray Q-rays can yield anywhere that's not just simply pointing out one of the vertices. And then there's the 2 torque turns that also need to be stabilized. Are these the 6 vectorial moves, or do the torques not count there? Positional differentials in universe derive only from the 6-ness of the 12 degrees of freedom. Struppi wrote, also 6 fingers of 4 eyes, each pointing 2 ways. Okay, 11. 537, 11. Each of the 6 positive and 6 negative energy lines impinging on every non-polarized point, focal event, in universe has a unique and symmetrical continuation beyond that point. The 6 positive and 6 negative vectors are symmetrically arrayed around the point. Consequently, all points in universe are inherently centers of a local and unique isotropic vector matrix domain containing 12 vertices as the corresponding centers of 12 closest packed spheres around a nuclear sphere. See Synergetics corollaries 24012, 24015, 24019. Experiments show that there are 6 positive and 6 negative degrees of fundamental transformation freedoms, which provide 12 alternative ways in which nature can behave most economically upon each and every energy event occurrence. Ergo, there is not just one other. There are always at least 12 others. See 502.25 and 511.03. Okay, let's return to the 11. Wow, what an amazing point. When all others are considered as one, dozen as one, one dozen, then we have sort of a classically dyadic agent environment niche, self, quote, other. But other is already plural because for that focal event to be what it is, which is in interaction with the closest packing event spheres around it, that would be the 12 closest packed spheres around the nuclear focal sphere. Another key point that the lines, here we have a focal event, and on this plane, there are 6 rays coming out of a length, and then there's 3 coming up and 3 coming down. And so 12 total, that's the vector equilibrium, all coming out equidistantly from this central focal point constituting IVM. And those lines have continuation. Okay. Wow. Okay. 240, 12, 15, and 19. 12. Wow, this is such a great section. Let's just read up to 19. Brief detour to 240, Synergetics corollaries. 1. Universe is finite. 2. Local systems are D-finite. 3. Unity is complex and at minimum 2. 4. The tetrahedron is the lowest common rational denominator of universe. The 4 unique quantum numbers of each and every fundamental particle are the 4 unique and minimum stars of every tetrahedron. 5. A point is a tetrahedron of negligible altitude and base dimensions. 6. A line or trajectory is a tetrahedron of negligible base dimension and significant altitude. 7. A plane or opening is a tetrahedron of negligible altitude and significant base dimensionality. 8. There are no solids or particles, no things. 9. A point is an as yet undifferentiated focal star embracing a complex of local events. 10. There are no indivisible points. 11. Unities may be treated as complex star points. 12. For every point in universe, there are 6 uniquely and exclusively operating vectors. 13. Vectors are size. No vectors equals no size. No size equals no vectors. 14. The size of a vector is its overall wavilinear length. 15. There are 6 vectors or none. 16. Every event has size. 17. Every event is 6-vectored. 18. 6 unique vectors constitute a tetrahedral event. 19. Each vector is reversible, having its negative alternate. Here's where we get the 12 from the 6 times 2. Such an interesting balance or frame shift with seeing tetrahedron as 4 vertexes as happenings, which lay down the points constituting the tetravertexion, and alternatively 4 eyes or tet as 6 unique vectors. Which is interesting when we return possibly later to the code and the calculations of tet volumes, where if you provide the 6 edge lengths, you can get the volume of the tetrahedron. But just providing the vertex locations would be like, well, what even is the frame of that? So, what came first, the point or the edge? Okay, back. 13. Shrupi wrote, it's always both at once. Hello, Upcycle Club. 13. We find that in the 12 degrees of freedom, the freedoms are all equal and they are all realizable with equal minimum effort. That's vector equilibria. That's the stabilization of the focal events within the vector equilibrium. 537, 131. 6 vectors for every point. The behavioral interpatterning frame of reference of the 6 degrees of freedom in respect to omnidirectionality is of course the vector equilibrium, of course, which embraces the 3-dimensionality of the cube and the 6-dimensionality of the vector equilibrium. Experience is inherently omnidirectional. Ergo, there is always a minimum of 12 others in respect to the nuclear observing self. The 24 positive and 24 negative vector equilibrium demonstrates an initially frequenced, tetrahedrally quantized unity of 20. Ergo, the universe, as an aggregate of all humanity's apprehended and comprehended experiences, is at minimum of plurality of 24 vectors. See sections 981.12 and 1224.21. There's always a minimum of 12 others in respect to the nuclear observing self. Okay, let's see where 981 takes us. (981.12). Okay, just to read 11 and 12 here. 981, 11, and 12. With all the 12 spherical othernesses around the initial self-oneness, sphericity, apparently uniformly diametered with the self, the positive-negative vectorial relativity of nuclear equilibrium is operationally established. The pattern of this nuclear equilibrium discloses 4 hexagonal planes symmetrically interacting and symmetrically arrayed. See section 415 around the nuclear center. Those are the 4 hexes, the 4 planes of continuation that constitute the 12 fingers, 12 rays of the vector equilibrium. 12 round 1. 12. Awareness of otherness involves mutually intertuned event frequencies. The 12 othernesses around the initially conceiving self-oneness establish both an inward and an outward synchroresonance. Circuit frequency involves a minimum two-ness. This initial frequency's inherent two-ness is totally invested as 1 inward plus 1 outward wave. 2 waves appearing superficially as 1 or none. That's kind of like feeling like the overall breathing in and breathing out of the membrane around a vector equilibrium. And always so many fun ways that can be explored. In one view, Newton's single vision, we have this as being just technical, analytical geometry, vectorial topology. Synergetics has geometry, and yet it dabbles and fuses namespaces with metacognition and psychology. In what ways is the recognition of selfness predicated upon a dyadic partitioning of self from other? And how is it related to selves and others? Okay, 537.14. Okay, there's a lot of interesting subsections in 537. 537.15. Basic event. A basic event consists of 3 vectorial lines: the action, the reaction, and the resultant. Kind of Hegelian, also called a zigzag. This is the fundamental tripartite component of universe. 1 positive and 1 negative event together make 1 tetrahedron or 1 quantum. That's the 2 chiralities of zigzag, interpenetrated, close out, 110. The number of vectors or force lines cohering each and every subsystem of universe is always a number subdivisible by 6, i.e. consisting of 1 positive and 1 negative event on each of 3 vectors, which adds up to 6. This holds true topologically in all abstract patterning in universe as well as in fundamental physics. The 6 vectors represent the fundamental 6 and only 6 degrees of freedom in universe. Each of these 6, however, has a positive and negative direction, and we can therefore speak of a total of 12 degrees of freedom. These 12 degrees of freedom can be conceptually visualized as the radial lines connecting the centers of gravity of the 12 spheres, closest packed around one sphere to the center of gravity of that central sphere. The 12 degrees of freedom are also identified by the push-pull alternative directions of the tetrahedron's 6 edges. Huge. So, 2 ways around 12ness here. Way 1, 6 edges on the tet. Each of them is a 2-way street. That's 12. You got 4 cities, and roads connecting the 4 cities or events. Each are 2-way. There's 12ness right there. 6 times 2. Another way that you get to 12 is 12 around 1, close packing spheres, vector equilibrium. 20. High tide aspects. 21. Spheres in closest packing are high tide aspects of vertices. It is easy to be misled into thinking that there are no lines involved when you see 2 spheres in tangency. because the lines are hidden inside the spheres and between the points of tangency. And if you do realize there's a force line between the two spheres' centers, you could assume there's only one line between the two. This is where you see that unity is 2, because the line breaks itself into the radii of two spheres. There's so many deep lore rabbit holes to go into here. For example, whether the distance between the two centers of spheres is taken as 1, therefore the radius of each of those spheres is 1/2, or whether the diameter of the sphere is taken as 2, so the distance between the centers of close-packed spheres is 2, and it turns out that like 9/8 and all these other long-standing differences in how you calculate the Synergetics volumetric constants hang on whether you give the distance between kissing spheres a value of 1 or a value of 2. They both work out, and for Kirby and I, some of our goals are to just make programs so that it's a user space configuration, whether they choose to see it one way or another. They both work. They're different, though. 22. In Synergetics, a line is the axis of intertangency of unity as plural and minimum 2. The line becomes the axis between two tangent balls, which without disturbing that single axis aspect can articulate both axial and circumferential degrees of freedom. 537.30. General systems applications. Okay. 31. The 12 universal degrees of freedom govern the external and internal motions of all independent systems in universe. In order to take synergetic strategy advantage and thereby to think comprehensively and anticipatorily in terms of total systems, we have to start off with universe itself as a closed finite system that misses none of the factors. We must also include all the universal degrees of freedom and the approximately unlimited range of frequencies in the use thereof, which cover all variable interrelationships of universe. They become the controlling factors governing general systems and thereby govern such super-complex systems design as that of a nation's navy or a fundamental program for comprehensively considerate and efficient, effective use of all world resources. The general systems approach starts with a differentiation of universe, including both metaphysical and physical, and permits progressive subdivisions in cybernetical bits to bring any local pattern of any problem into its identification within the total scheme of generalized system events. Problem solving starts with universe, and thereafter subdivides by progressively discarding irrelevancies, thereby to identify the critical path priorities and order of overlapping developments that will most economically and efficiently and expeditiously realize the problem solution by special local problem identification and location within the totality of the problem-solving scenario. Here, many fascinating touches of operationalism, American pragmatism, even nods towards cybernetics and world game, allusions to Bucky's own time in the Navy, and connection and building on the previous sections of 12ness of degrees of freedom with this general theme that just cannot be returned to enough, with the general abstraction generalizations and then the minute particulars and the specificities and the uniqueness of every situation. Like the generalities of things, free energy principle, and the specifics of each thing. 32. Because of our overspecialization and our narrow electromagnetic spectrum range of our vision, we have very limited integrated comprehension of the significance of total information. For this reason, we see and comprehend very few motions among the vast inventory of unique motions and transformation developments of universe. Universe is a non-simultaneous complex of unique motions and transformations. Of course, we do not see, and our eyes cannot stop, the 186,000 miles per second kind of motion. We do not see atomic motion. We do not even see the stars in motion, though they move at speeds of over 1 million miles per day. We do not see the tree or the child's moment-to-moment growth. We do not even see the hands of a clock in motion. We remember where the hands of a clock were when we last looked, and thus we accredit that motion has occurred. In fact, experiment shows that we see and comprehend very little of the totality of motions. Here, with this experiment reference, and in section 12, I'm also curious, what are these experiments? And a classic and comedic mapping between our length constraints on retinal perception of electromagnetism, like 400 to 700 nanometers, amidst a broader electromagnetic spectrum, and connecting that to niche over specialization. 33. Okay. Therefore, society tends to think statically and is always being surprised, often uncomfortably, sometimes fatally, by the omni-inexorable motion of universe. Lacking dynamic apprehension, it is difficult for humanity to get out of its static fixation and to see great trends evolving. Just now, man is coming into technical discovery of general systems theory. The experimental probing of the potentials of the computers awakened man to a realization of the vast complexes of variables that can be mastered by general systems theory. So far, man has dealt but meagerly and non-comprehensively with his powerful planning capability. So far, he has employed only limited systems theory in special open-edged systems, tic-tac-toe, rectilinear grid systems, and planar matrices. The arbitrary open parameters of infinite systems can never be guaranteed to be adequate statements of all possible variables. Infinite systems engender an infinite number of variable factors. Unless one starts with universe, one always inadvertently starts with open infinite systems. Only by starting with finite universe and progressively dismissing finite irrelevancies can one initiate finite, locally limited, general systems theory to assured satisfaction in problem solving. Very interesting. One of the relatively rare-ish mentions of Bucky to what it is that computers play a role in terms of people's development of systems theory. But how 70s and 80s is this? And yet, in our reinforcement learning, synthetic intelligence, active inference, minimal models, we still tend to begin with the grid world, with the rat in the maze, with the tic-tac-toe, all being done with the planar matrices. 34. The Dybaxian air-ocean world map, just for reference, this one, is only one of the many devices that could provide man with a total information integrating medium. We are going to have to find effective ways for all of humanity to see total Earth. Nothing could be more prominent in all the trending of all humanity today than the fact we are soon to become world man, yet we are greatly frustrated by all our local static organizations of an obsolete yesterday. Reminds me of I'll Take a Melody, Jerry Garcia, Living in Yesterday's Tomorrow. 40. Game of Universe, Individuality and Degrees of Freedom. 41. We may define the individual as one way the game of universe could have eventuated to date. Universe is the omnidirectional, omnifrequency game of chess in which with each turn of the play, there are 12 vectorial degrees of freedom, 6 positive and 6 negative moves to be made. This is a phenomenon of frequency and periodicities. Each individual is a complete game of universe from beginning to end. This is why each of us individuals is so much alike and yet completely different. A unique and individual way of playing the game with each of the omnidirectional degrees of freedom. With the 6 positive and 6 negative omnidirectional degrees of freedom, moves to be made at each turn of the play, the individual can move to any cosmic point that is not occupied and can move back over the same points or move on to new ones. See Figure 537.10. Intellect as God can play all these incredibly different games in all these different ways and at all the differential rates at the same time. See 1002.12. So here, there's an interesting, almost holographic nesting where individualization arises within finite universe. Finite individuation arises within finite universe. Scenario, total scenario. Yet each individual is a complete game of universe. This is sort of like the time cone of Mike Levin et al., where if we have the last common causal ancestor in the past, and then the future convergent omega of that individual, there's like a cone with the thickness in the present as the thing as it is then, and that entire sort of torpedo shape is its own complete game. And then this part, this is why each of us individuals is so much alike and yet completely different. That reminds me of here in Blake's pamphlet, All Religions Are One. As all men are alike, though infinitely various, so all religions, and as all similars have one source. And there's several other Blake quotations. Men differ as much as they differ, exactly how they differ, and they are the same in exactly the ways they are the same. 1002, thank you, Stroopy. Sweet dreams. Stroopy wrote, sleep sleep is upon me. Awesome way to tune in to my 3,001st Be Earth Day. Thank you. Spherical wishings to you, Stroopy. Okay. 1002.12. Here it is. Carrying on. 42. Couple more slides on this 537. 42. The individual differentiates position in universe. The 6 degrees of freedom operate at every turn of the play. Just think of the frequencies per second of each of the chemical elements that make up the individual human body and then think of the periodicities of those frequency. 43. That each individual is a complete integrity is one of the reasons I don't have to make any effort in loving my fellow human. In the first person plural of we, even the I even classes itself with the other. Each individual integrity has a steering effect, and like all steering effects, it goes from one aberration to another. Certain individuals may be very wide aberrations from all the corruption that's going on in universe, acting as just one of those infrequent and very wide aberrations so that the universe can hold its center. At that center sphere is the two, and you turn inside out and only the tetrahedron turns inside out. The other side of the universe is not like the other side of the river. It is an inside outing. 44. We regard each individual as the special case, but consciousness as the generalization, like the bumper sticker. The real world is special case. Reality is special case. You and I are sitting here, and no one else can be sitting right where we are. This is the kind of reality that the newspapers miss. They write about reality as if we were all the same realities, as if we were all the same things. If you and I are sitting here, we couldn't possibly be anywhere else. If we are sitting here, we are, though. 45. There are many different realities. This is the difference between reality and generalization. There's only one generalization. The only reason the radio works is that it has no interference. I mean, some interesting contendables here. Different perspectives upon unified scenario universe, possibly, but do those perspectives constitute their own realities? And then the only reason the radio works is that it has no interference, but that doesn't sound empirically what happens. Unless, interference is taken to mean that which can't happen, whatever the strength of a signal actually is, or something like this. The game of universe can be played on any one of the fantastically large number of the quadrillions of frequencies. The game can be played anyway, just so long as there is no interference on the frequency you are using, so long as there are not two pieces in the same vector equilibrium at the same time. It's sort of like, again, there couldn't be two different things occupying the same space-time. Otherwise, they wouldn't be discernible, if not even able to exist. And this is taking that into the frequency domain. 46. What is important about the individual and important about the universe is that neither is exempt from any of the rules. Universe is the sum total, and the individual is the special case. Universe is the aggregate of all the generalized principles. Each individual is one of the illions of ways the game of universe could be played. Again, sort of a Wolfram-esque finite state automata. Like, you have a finite number of molecules or atoms constituting a human body. Each of those have these finite affordances, constraints, degrees of freedom, mobilities, 12. So each time step, I'm curious as to where and how Synergetics discusses continuous time and discrete time. The ticking of the clock was a little bit of a hint, but not totally. In the unfolding, each of those discrete number, large number, but discrete number, can play out a certain way. Okay. Next topics. It's going to be like seeing how in the 50-ish years these topics have evolved in the general perception, it's also so interesting how synergetics is just like drinking a cup of water when thirsty still. 537.50. Freedom and will. 51. I think I tend to avoid using the word will because I spontaneously associate it with the term free will and all the controversies regarding the history of such human beliefs. I have felt that all such controversies lack adequate knowledge of science's generalized laws. To me, it is obvious that no amount of individual will can nullify any cosmic law. It is also obvious to me that few know of and comprehend the significance of nature's having 6 positive and 6 negative, equi-economical, alternative moves to make with each turn to play in cosmic events. 52. It is clear to me that most humans tend to think in a linear go or no-go, green light, red light manner. To me, will is an optionally exercisable, controlled by mind over brain by wisdom, over conditioned reflex, that becomes realizable when mind is adequately convinced regarding which of the 12 alternatives will produce the most comprehensively considerate vital advantage for all. '53. In a lesser way, will becomes operative when the individual finds himself in terminal peril and has only seconds to pull out of a tailspin, when he becomes cool. That is, when he discovers swiftly which of the alternative moves can save him and exercises his will to execute the survival procedures. Will determines what we should do in all the special case circumstances. Will is not a muscle thing, not the clenched fist at all. People say I have a strong will, but what I have is a fairly clear view of the options of humanity and the commitments to their realization. It is thus that I determine what course to take in the special cases confronting us. 538. Probability. This will be the last medium-ish section to go through. It was like 537 ended, and then it was like 538. What does Synergetics say about probability? 1. Nature's probability is not linear or planar, but the mathematical models with which it is treated today are almost exclusively linear. Real universe probability accommodates the omnidirectional, interaccommodative, transformating transactions of universal events, which humanity identifies superficially as environment. Probability articulates locally in universe in response to the organically integral, generalized, omnidirectional, in, out, inside out, outside in, and around events of the self-system, as well as with the self-system's extra-organic travel and externally imposed processing around and amongst the inwardly and outwardly contiguous forces of the considered system as imposed by both its synchronously and contiguously critical near macrocosmic and microcosmic neighbors. Super dense, a bit oblique. But the next sections are going to bring a lot of light towards this. Real universe's probability laws of spherically propagative whole systems developments are intimately and finitely conditioned by the three-way great circle spherical grids, inherently embracing and defining the non-redundant structuring of all systems, as formingly generated by critical proximity interferences of the system's components, behaviors, and their dynamical self-triangulations, into unique system structuring symmetries whose configurations are characterized by the relative abundance patterning laws of topological crossing points, areas, and lines of any considered system, as generally disclosed by the closed system hierarchy of synergetics. Synergetics, by relating energy and topology to the tetrahedron and to systems, as defined by its synergetic hierarchy, replaces randomness with a rational hierarchy of omni-intertransformative phase identifications and quantized rates of relative intertransformations. The first feel I get from this is, with no stabilization of any of the four quadrats, there's no touch empirically. When 1, 2, and finally 3 intersections of great circles occur, there's tighter and tighter, what could be called probabilistic, but this is an extreme contingency with the macrocosm and the microcosm. And this relates to deterministic, implicate order type quantum models where sampling error of high frequency events yields quantum probabilities, while larger and larger systems look more and more classical because their high frequency nature is obscured. Okay, this part is going to be super interesting. 10. Probability model of 3 cars on a highway. 11. I am tying up the social experience often observed in which 3 independently and consistently velocitied automobiles, and only 3, come into close proximity on the highway, often with no other cars at sight. Mathematically speaking, 3 points and only 3 define both a plane and a triangle. The cars make a triangle, and because it is mathematically discovered that the total number of points or areas or lines of a system are always even numbers, and that this divisibility by 2 accommodates the polar and hemispherical positive negativeness of all systems, and because the defining of one small triangle on the surface of a system always inadvertently defines a large triangle representing the remainder of the whole system's surface, and that this large triangle's corners will always be more than 180 degrees each. Ergo, the triangle is an inside-out, i.e. negative triangle, and to convert it to positive condition requires halving or otherwise fractionating each of its 3 corners by great circle lines running together somewhere within the great negative triangle. Thus, there develops a minimum of 4 positive triangles embracing the Earth induced by such 3-car convergences. This would be a nice thing to get a visual on. 12. The triangle made by the 3 cars is a complementarity of the 3 other spherical triangles on the Earth's surface. The triangle formed by the 2 cars going one way and the other way gets smaller and smaller and then reverses itself, getting ever larger. There's always a closer proximity between 2 of the 3. This is all governed by topological pattern integrity. What about when they're equidistant? This next piece has some very fascinating connections with free energy principle. 13. Probability is exclusively abstract mathematics, theoretically calculated points on curves. The statisticians think almost exclusively in lines or planes. They are what I call planilinear. Willard Gibbs, #Gibbs free energy, in evolving his phase rule, was engaged in probability relating to chemistry when he inadvertently and intuitively conceived of his phase rule for explaining the number of energetic freedoms necessary to introduce into a system complexly constituted of crystals, liquids, and gases. in order to unlock them into a common state of liquidity. His discovered phase rule and topology are the same. They are both synergetic. Despite the synergetic of such pioneers as Euler and Gibbs, all the different chemistries and topologies still seem to be random. But synergetics, by relating energy and topology to the tetrahedron and to systems as defined, and by its synergetic hierarchy, replaces randomness with a rational cosmic shape and structural system hierarchy. This hierarchy discloses a constant relative abundance of the constituents, i.e., for every nonpolar point, there are always two faces and three edges. But systems occur only as defined by 4 points. Prime structural systems are inherently tetrahedral, as is also the quantum. This seems to have to do with how information geometries, right there in the name, are dealing with spaces, manifolds, points in space, coordinations, etc., measure theory, mensuration. And yet, in phase transitions, we see topological scale-free behavior. Last piece here. 14. A social experience of three cars. They make a triangle changing from scalene to equilateral to scalene. The triangles are where the cars don't hit. These are simply the windows, but you can't draw less than 4 triangles. The complementarity of the 3 triangles makes the spherical tetrahedron, which makes the 3-way grid. The littlest spherical triangle window is visible to human observers in greatest magnitude of human observability and awareness of such 3-car triangles at 15 miles distance, which is 15 minutes of spherical arc of our Earth. Such dynamically defined Earth triangulation is not a static grid because the lines do not go through the same point at the same time. Lines which are always action trajectories never do. All we have is patterning integrity of critical proximities. There's always a non-violated intervening boundary condition. This is all that nature ever has. Okay, 15. Nature modulates probability and the degrees of freedom, i.e., frequency and angle, leading to the tensegrity sphere, which leads to the pneumatic bag, all of which are the same kind of reality as 3 automobiles. All the cosmic triangling of all the variety of angles always averages out to 60 degrees. That is the probability of all closed systems, of which the universe is the amorphous largest case. Probability is not linear or planar, but is always following the laws of sphericity or whole systems. Probability is always dependent upon critical proximity, omnidirectional, and only dynamically defined 3-way gridding pattern integrity, and with the concomitant, topologically constant relative abundance of points, areas, and lines all governed in an orderly way by low-order, prime number, behavioral uniqueness as disclosed by Synergetics. This is interesting about probability happening on spheres, because that, again, connects to what we call quantum statistics. And the next section is quantum wave phenomena 539, and frame of reference, there's so many good things. That's why we read from it. Okay, in closing, going to just pop over to the coda for Math for Wisdom. 1 second to crop in OBS. Let's do a little OBS fractal while we crop. Thank you, Upcycle. All right. So the link for the Math for Wisdom coda is in the video description. Just kind of wanted to, as we look towards the rest of 2025, and most of it is yet to come. How exciting. Big picture in the meetings, there are twin channeled meetings, joinable for those who are around while we're here, with Knowledge Math. Working with Andreas and others, we discuss a lot of topics related to wondrous wisdom, culture, math, category theory, and in knowledge engineering with Kirby Erner, where we have been on a delightful journey, truly. And here I'll just highlight the art is fun as well. So for everyone's exploration, but in Synergetics, there's a lot to look through. So just quickly to cap what is here. This Synergetics page is actually a great landing page for Synergetics overall. Here with the 2 R's, this is exactly what was discussed earlier with the 2 radii making 1. So R is 1/2 and D is 1. Or if D is set to be 2, then R is given a value of 1. Here's the person in the cube and the 2 interpenetrating tetrahedra that constitute the 8 points of the cube and stabilize it. Kirby's backyard. Code. This is the equation. This is like core human knowledge. Here's the catacombs, the codacombs. That's where we are now. Synergetics and language. Language and code models. More code and work with Kirby. Notes. Here's Stroopy. Happy Spheres Day to you. Happy Spheres Day to you. IVM XYZ. This was some code developed with Kirby and I that was in an earlier Synergetics livestream, 18. Working on a package so that we can convert XYZ and IVM distances and volumes. Synergetics videos. Here's the person in the TET. On this page, also on my channel. Kirby, Dimension, and Synergetics from Math Art Stream number 4 at the Active Inference Institute. Weaving Timelines. Incredible compilations. School of Tomorrow. Quadrace. The coordination system that Kirby has pioneered and brought into code. R. Buckminster Fuller Page. This is an article that Kirby wrote in 1998, and it's a wonderful, several-page long place to enter. 4D, New World Game. I think through TrimTab mailing list, somehow I heard about this and signed up, and as usual, Kirby brings deep lore. Noel Coughlin, of which there are 2 live streams on my channel with Noel, who takes a very different approach to Synergetics, but has also made some incredible contributions for others to explore. Stroopy, who was live chatting with us earlier, who makes absolutely unique and beautiful adventures. Stroopy Image Export. Here, I believe I went to the Telegram channel of Stroopy. This is going to like crash the browser. And exported all of the images. Yeah. And so I think this page is probably several gigabytes of images. Oh. Loading. Great circles. Quick, run away, run away. This is just a stub, but Andreas and I expect to connect the Great Circle aspects of Wondrous Wisdom to some of what was just discussed today. And then here's the Synergetic streams and some slides and links and other places to go. So in closing for this stream, I was glad to get back in the game with the reading of 537 and 538 and to quickly show a little bit of what we're working on in Math for Wisdom. And I look forward to seeing where the year takes us. So if you're watching, I hope you're enjoying, hope you're learning, where you have affinity and resonance or questions, dissonances, all the above. I look forward to hearing from you and to seeing where Synergetics and USAOS and the School of Tomorrow and all these things get in the year and years to come. So, peace. Thank you.